The bell above the door made a sound so thin, it barely registered against the wind outside. January cold had teeth in this part of Pennsylvania, the kind that bit through coat linings and found the bones beneath. The man who stepped into Henderson's pawn and loan didn't look up when he entered. His eyes stayed fixed on the scuffed tile floor, shoulders hunched forward like he was still bracing against the weather, even though the door had already closed behind him. Elias Thorne was 71 years old, though the mirror lately suggested older. His coat, a thrift store navy peacoat with one button missing, hung loose on a frame that had once carried 190 pounds of Marine Corps muscle. Now it carried maybe 150, and that was being generous. His hands, bare because he'd lost his gloves, somewhere between the bus stop and here, were red and cracked at the knuckles. When he breathed, small clouds formed in the air. The shop's heating system worked but barely, and Mr. Henderson kept it low to save on bills. Behind the counter, Marcus Henderson looked up from the estate jewelry he'd been cataloguing. 63, broad across the chest, with silver hair cut military short and reading glasses perched on his nose, Henderson had owned this shop for 22 years. Before that, he'd done 2 tours in Vietnam with the 1st Cavalry Division. He knew how to read men the way jewelers read stones, by weight, by clarity, by the fractures that ran beneath the surface. The old man approaching his counter had fractures. "Help you with something?" Henderson's voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who'd seen every kind of desperation walk through his door. Wedding rings from fresh divorces, guitars from failed dreams, watches from men who'd run out of time in more ways than one. Elias stopped 3 feet from the counter. His right hand went into his coat pocket. For a moment it stayed there, fingers wrapped around something. Henderson waited. Patience was part of the job. Finally, slowly, Elias withdrew his hand and placed something on the glass countertop, a Purple Heart medal. The ribbon, purple with white edges, had faded to a dusty lavender. The gold-bordered heart itself, with George Washington's profile in the center, caught the overhead fluorescent light. It sat between them like a third presence in the room, heavy with meaning that had nothing to do with its actual weight of 0.32 ounces. Henderson's eyes moved from the medal to the man's face. Elias still wasn't making eye contact. "Need $20, Elias said. His voice was quiet, roughened by years and weather, and something else. Shame, maybe, or just exhaustion, so complete it had worn down to something that looked like it. "Just 20. I can buy it back. Next month. When my check comes." Henderson didn't touch the medal, not yet. "What's your name, sir?" "Thorne, Elias Thorne." "Mr. Thorne." Henderson kept his voice level. "You know what you're pawning here." "I know." 2 words, flat as stones. "You earn this?" For the first time, Elias looked up. His eyes were pale blue, watery at the edges, but something in them still held steel. "K-Sun, February 68. Took shrapnel in my leg and back pulling my radio man out of a collapsed bunker during an artillery barrage." The words came out like a memorized report, facts delivered without emotion. "They pinned it on me at the field hospital in Da Nang 3 weeks later. I was 20 years old." Henderson nodded slowly. He'd been in country in 68. Different unit, different sector, but the same war, the same mud, the same sound of incoming rounds that you never quite stopped hearing, even 50 years later in a pawn shop in Pennsylvania. $20, Henderson repeated. "Yes, sir." "For heating? Food?" Elias's jaw tightened. "Heat." The gas company sent a shut-off notice. "I'm 3 months behind. They want $240 to keep it on, but if I can give them something, anything by Friday, they said they'd give me another 2 weeks. I got some applications in at the grocery store. The hardware place down on 5th. Something'll come through." Henderson looked at him, really looked. The coat with the missing button, the pants that had been hemmed by hand unevenly, the boots that were good leather once, probably military issue but now cracked across the toes and worn smooth at the heels. This was a man who'd been falling for a while, slowly enough that maybe he hadn't noticed until he hit bottom. "You got family, Mr. Thorne?" "Had a wife, Sarah. She passed 4 years ago. Cancer." Elias's voice didn't change. "No kids. Sister in Oregon, but we haven't talked in a long time. Friends. Most of them are dead or moved away." He paused. "Look, I don't need charity. This is a pawn shop. I got something of value. You give me money, I buy it back later. That's how it works. I'm not asking for a handout." There it was. The pride. Henderson recognized it because he'd felt it himself. That specifically military brand of pride that would rather starve than accept what it perceived as pity. It was the same pride that made men sleep in their cars rather than admit they couldn't make rent. The same pride that turned asking for help into a kind of failure, worse than any enemy fire. Henderson reached out and picked up the Purple Heart. It was cool in his palm, the metal smooth except where the ribbon attachment had worn slightly rough. He turned it over. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, PFC Elias J. Thorne, Private First Class. Enlisted man, the ones who did the bleeding while officers got the glory. This means something to you, Mr. Thorne? Elias's hands resting on the counter's edge tightened into fists. It means I did my job. It means I was there. It means... He stopped, swallowed. It means I got hurt for my country, and they gave me a piece of metal to make it square. But it doesn't pay the gas bill. It doesn't keep me warm, and I'm so goddamn tired of being cold. The last sentence came out raw, unguarded. For just a second, the mask slipped and Henderson saw what was underneath. Not just poverty, not just age, but a weariness so profound it had settled into the man's bones. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. Henderson set the medal back down on the counter. "Wait here," he said. He turned and walked toward the front of the shop, past the display cases of guitars and power tools, past the rack of fur coats that nobody ever bought, past the shelf of old vinyl records. Elias watched him, confused. Henderson reached the front door, glass and steel with a security grate that rolled down at night, and did two things. First, he turned the deadbolt, locking it with a solid click. Second, he flipped the hanging sign from open to closed. Then he walked back to the counter. Elias had gone very still. "What are you doing?" "I'm not buying this medal," Henderson said, "and I'm not letting you sell it. You can't." "My shop, my rules." Henderson's voice wasn't unkind, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne." There was a wooden stool near the counter, the kind Henderson used when his back got tired from standing. Elias looked at it, then at Henderson, then at the locked door. Something in his expression shifted, not quite fear, but a kind of trapped wariness, like an animal that had been cornered too many times to trust easy gestures. "I'm not going to hurt you," Henderson said quietly, "and I'm not going to steal from you, but I'm also not going to participate in you selling the proof that you bled for this country so you can scrape together $20. So sit down and give me a minute." Elias sat, slowly. His hands stayed in his lap, fingers laced together. Henderson picked up his phone, an old landline because he didn't trust cell phones and didn't care who knew it, and dialed from memory. It rang 3 times before someone picked up. "Veteran Services. This is Monica." "Monica, it's Marcus Henderson. I need you to do something for me." "Marcus, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I need you to pull a file. Name's Elias Thorne, Thorne, Marine Corps, served in Vietnam, Purple Heart recipient. I need to know what benefits he's registered for and why the hell he's trying to pawn his medal to pay his heating bill." There was a pause. "That's confidential information, Marcus. I can't just..." "Monica," Henderson's voice dropped into a register that had once commanded men under fire. "I've got him sitting in my shop right now. He's 71 years old. He's freezing, and he's so far past pride he's willing to sell the medal they gave him for bleeding. I'm not asking you to violate HIPAA. I'm asking you to tell me if this man is getting the help he's entitled to." Another pause. Longer. Then, "Give me 5 minutes. I'll call you back." Henderson hung up. Elias was watching him with an expression that mixed confusion and something that might have been hope, if hope hadn't been beaten out of him a long time ago. "What are you doing?" Elias asked again. "My job," Henderson said. "Different job than running this shop, but still my job. I don't understand." "You will." They waited in silence. The shop's heating system clicked and hummed. Outside, wind rattled the security grate. A car passed, its tires hissing on wet pavement. Henderson used the time to study Elias more carefully. The man's hands trembled slightly. Not a palsy, but the fine shake of someone whose blood sugar was too low, who hadn't eaten enough for too long. His lips were chapped and cracked. There was a hollow quality to his cheeks that spoke of meals skipped, portions stretched, the slow starvation of fixed incomes and rising costs. The phone rang. Henderson picked it up. "Yeah, Marcus, I pulled his file." Monica's voice was tight. "He's not registered for anything. No VA healthcare, no disability, no pension. According to our system, he's not in it at all. How is that possible? He's got a Purple Heart. I don't know. Sometimes guys from that era, they came home and just..." Didn't engage with the system, didn't file claims, didn't register. They wanted to put it behind them, so they did. And then decades pass, and they end up like this. Yeah, like this. She paused. Marcus, if he's willing to come in, I can start the paperwork, get him registered, file for disability, get him into healthcare. But it takes time, weeks, maybe months. He doesn't have months. He's got until Friday before they shut off his heat. I can't expedite. I know you can't. But I can do something else. Thanks, Monica. He hung up before she could respond and immediately dialed another number. This one rang longer. Finally, a gruff voice answered. Yeah? Tommy, it's Marcus. Marcus? Jesus, how long's it been? Too long. Listen, I need a favor. You still run the VFW post on 7th. Commander for 3 years now. What do you need? I've got a Marine in my shop. Vietnam, 68, Khe Sanh, Purple Heart. He's 3 months behind on his gas bill and he just tried to pawn his medal to keep the heat on. The line went quiet. Then, give me his information. Henderson looked at Elias. Mr. Thorne, I need your full name, address, and the name of your gas company. Elias recited them mechanically, like he was filling out a form he'd filled out 100 times before. Henderson repeated the information to Tommy. Got it, Tommy said. I'll make some calls. We've got an emergency fund for exactly this kind of thing. How much does he need? 240 to clear the debt. But Tommy, he needs more than that. He needs food. He needs to know he's not alone. Understood. Give me 20 minutes. Henderson hung up and dialed a third number, then a fourth, then a fifth. Each time the conversation was brief. Each time he gave Elias's name and situation. Each time the person on the other end said some version of, I'll be there. Elias watched this with growing bewilderment. What are you doing? He asked for the third time, but now his voice carried a different tone, not suspicion, but something closer to disbelief. Calling in reinforcements, Henderson said. He set the phone down and looked directly at Elias. Mr. Thorne, you said you don't want charity. I respect that, but what you're about to receive isn't charity, it's a debt being paid. I don't understand. You will, Henderson said again. Just wait. If you believe every life holds a story worth remembering, subscribe to this channel and join our community. 16 minutes later, the first knock came at the door. Henderson unlocked it and opened it to reveal a man in his 60s, barrel-chested, wearing a VFW cap and a thick winter jacket. Tommy Delgado, Army, 2 tours in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne. He carried 2 grocery bags. Where is he? Tommy asked. Henderson pointed to Elias, still sitting on the stool, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Tommy walked over and set the bags on the counter. Elias Thorne? Yes? Tommy Delgado. I was at Hamburger Hill in 69. Heard you were at Khe Sanh. I was. Then you saw worse than I did. Tommy extended his hand. After a moment, Elias shook it. The VFW post is covering your gas bill. All of it. You're paid up through the end of winter. Elias stared at him. I can't. You can and you will. It's already done. I called the gas company from my car, gave them a credit card number. You're square. Tommy gestured to the bags. That's food. Nothing fancy. Soup, bread, coffee, some canned goods. Enough to get you through a couple weeks. I don't. Elias's voice cracked. I can't accept. You're not accepting charity, Marine. You're accepting what you're owed. You bled for this country. The least we can do is make sure you don't freeze or starve. Tommy's voice was firm but not unkind. Understood? Elias opened his mouth, closed it, nodded. Another knock at the door. This time it was a woman in her 50s, short and round, with kind eyes and a nurse's scrubs visible under her coat. Henderson let her in. I'm Patricia Ruiz, she said, walking straight to Elias. I'm a nurse at the VA clinic. Marcus called me. When's the last time you saw a doctor? I don't know. Few years. You registered with the VA? No. You are now. I've got paperwork in my car. We're going to fill it out together and I'm going to personally walk it through the system. You'll have health care by the end of the month. And in the meantime, she pulled a card from her pocket. That's my direct number. You feel sick, you call me. You need medication, you call me. You need anything medical, you call me. Clear? Elias took the card with shaking hands. Why are you doing this? Because my father was a Marine. He died in 2003 and he always said the Corps takes care of its own. So I take care of Marines when I can. She smiled. Besides, Marcus said you were at Khe Sanh. My dad talked about that battle like it was the worst thing he ever heard of. Said the men who survived it were tougher than nails. I believe him. Another knock. Then another. Over the next 30 minutes, 7 more people arrived at Henderson's pawn and loan. A representative from the County Social Services Office who registered Elias for food assistance and helped him apply for supplemental income. A lawyer from the Veterans Legal Clinic who began the process of filing disability claims for the shrapnel wounds that still ached in Elias's back and leg. A man from the local Lutheran church who offered to connect Elias with their senior support group. A woman from Meals on Wheels who signed him up for daily food delivery. A contractor who offered to do a free home safety inspection and make any necessary repairs. Each person brought something: information, resources, contact numbers, sometimes physical goods. The counter filled with business cards, pamphlets, bags of food, a warm winter coat that someone had brought from their car. The shop, which had been cold and empty when Elias walked in, became crowded and warm with bodies and voices. Elias sat in the center of it all, overwhelmed. He kept trying to speak, to protest, to explain that he didn't deserve this, but each time someone would gently cut him off. "You do deserve it. This is what we do. You're not alone anymore." Henderson watched from behind the counter, arms crossed, a small smile on his face. This was why he'd opened the shop in this neighborhood, in this building. Not to make money, though he made enough to get by, but to be a place where people came when they had nothing left. And sometimes when the right person came through that door, he could do more than just take their desperation and give them cash. Sometimes he could make a call. Sometimes he could lock the door and change everything. Tommy Delgado pulled Henderson aside while the social worker was explaining benefit programs to Elias. "You did good, Marcus," Tommy said quietly. "I just made some phone calls. You did more than that. You saw him. Really saw him." Most people would have just taken the medal, given him $20, and sent him back out into the cold. Tommy glanced at Elias, who was nodding along to something the nurse was saying, looking dazed. "How many guys like him you think are out there? Guys who fell through the cracks?" "Too many," Henderson said. "Yeah." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "We should do something about that. We are doing something about it. Right now. I mean bigger. A program. Outreach. Something so guys like Elias don't have to get to the point where they're pawning their medals." Tommy looked at Henderson. "You interested?" Henderson thought about it. Thought about all the men he'd known who'd come home from war and never quite made it all the way back. Thought about the ones who'd died alone or broke or forgotten. Thought about the ones who were still out there right now, trying to decide which bill to pay and which to let slide. "Yeah," he said. "I'm interested." "Good. I'll set up a meeting. Next week we'll figure it out." Tommy clapped him on the shoulder. "For now, let's take care of this one." By the time the last person left, it was nearly 5 o'clock. The winter sun had set, and the streetlights outside cast orange pools on the wet pavement. Henderson locked the door behind the social worker and turned back to Elias. The old Marine was still sitting on the stool, surrounded by bags and papers and business cards. The Purple Heart medal sat on the counter where Henderson had placed it, untouched. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said gently, "you still with me?" Elias looked up. His eyes were wet. "I don't understand," he said, for what must have been the 10th time. "I don't understand why you did this." Henderson walked over and picked up the Purple Heart. He held it out to Elias. "Because this," he gestured with the medal, "means something. Not because it's metal or because it's official or because some general pinned it on you. It means something because of what you did to earn it. You put yourself between danger and another man. You bled. You survived. And that matters." He pressed the medal into Elias's palm and closed the old man's fingers around it. "You came in here ready to sell your proof of service for $20 because you were cold and hungry and alone, and I couldn't let that happen. Not because I'm a good person, I'm not particularly, but because I'm a veteran and you're a veteran, and that means we're brothers. And brothers don't let brothers freeze." Elias's shoulders began to shake. He bent forward, the medal clutched in his fist, and wept. Not quietly, not with dignity. He wept the way men weep when they've been holding it in for years, for decades, when the dam finally breaks and everything comes flooding out at once. Henderson let him. He didn't offer platitudes or try to stop it. He just stood there, one hand on Elias's shoulder, and waited. When the storm finally passed, Elias straightened up. His face was blotchy and wet, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked at Henderson. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me. Thank them." Henderson gestured to the empty shop, to the space where all those people had been. "Thank the community. Thank the guys who set up the emergency fund. Thank the nurse who's going to push your paperwork through. Thank all of them." "I will." "And Mr. Thorne?" "Yes?" "Don't try to do this alone anymore. You've got people now. Use them." Elias nodded. He stood up slowly, his joints creaking, and began gathering the bags and papers. Henderson helped him, loading everything into a large canvas bag that someone had left. When they were done, Henderson unlocked the door and held it open. Cold air rushed in, but it didn't seem as bitter as before. Elias paused in the doorway. He looked back at Henderson, then down at the purple heart in his hand. "I was going to sell this," he said quietly. "I was really going to do it, I know. I thought it didn't matter anymore. I thought I didn't matter anymore." "You were wrong," Henderson said simply. Elias nodded. He slipped the medal into his coat pocket, carefully, reverently, and stepped out into the night. Henderson watched him walk to the bus stop, the canvas bag slung over his shoulder, moving with just a little more straightness in his spine than when he'd arrived. When the bus came and Elias climbed aboard, Henderson finally closed the door. He locked it, flipped the sign back to open for tomorrow, and returned to his counter. The estate jewelry he'd been cataloging was still there, waiting. He sat down and picked up his loupe, but he didn't look through it. Instead, he stared at the spot on the counter where the purple heart had rested. $20. A man's service, his pain, his proof of sacrifice, reduced to $20. But not tonight. Tonight, it had been worth everything. Henderson set down his loupe and picked up the phone. He had more calls to make. Tommy was right. They needed a program. Something systematic. Something so the next Elias Thorne didn't have to walk into a pawn shop with his medal in his pocket. He started dialing. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the city in white. Inside Henderson's pawn and loan, the lights stayed on late into the night, and the work of remembering, of honoring, of caring continued, because some debts could never be repaid in full, but they could be acknowledged, they could be honored, and they could be met with the same courage and sacrifice they represented, one man at a time, one medal at a time, one locked door and one phone call, and one community rising to say, "You are not forgotten, you are not alone, you matter." And that, Henderson thought as he dialed the next number, was worth more than all the gold and silver and precious stones in his shop. It was worth everything. The bus ride home took 40 minutes, but Elias barely noticed the time passing. He sat near the back, the canvas bag at his feet, his hand in his coat pocket wrapped around the purple heart. The metal had warmed from his body heat, and he held it the way a drowning man holds a lifeline. Through the foggy window, the city slid past, storefronts closing for the night, streetlights flickering on, people hurrying home through the falling snow. Elias watched them without really seeing them. His mind was still in that pawn shop, still trying to process what had happened. He'd walked in ready to surrender the last piece of proof that his life had meant something. He'd walked out with his heat paid, food in his bag, and a dozen people who'd promised to help him. It didn't make sense. The world didn't work that way. The world took and never gave back. Except today it had. The bus stopped at Maple and 3rd, and Elias got off. His apartment was 3 blocks away in a building that had been nice once, maybe 30 years ago. Now the brick was crumbling, the front door didn't lock properly, and the hallway smelled like mildew and old cooking grease. He climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, no elevator, and his bad leg ached with each step, and unlocked the door to apartment 2C. Inside, the air was cold but not freezing. The radiator clanked and hissed, struggling to produce heat. Elias set the canvas bag on the small kitchen table and stood there for a moment, looking around. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and dining room. A kitchenette with a hot plate and a mini fridge. A bathroom so small you could barely turn around in it. The furniture was salvaged. A sagging couch from someone's curb. A table with uneven legs. A mattress on the floor because he'd sold the bed frame 2 years ago. The walls were bare except for one framed photograph, Elias and Sarah on their wedding day. Both of them young and smiling, the whole world ahead of them. He looked at that photograph for a long time. "I wish you were here, Sarah," he said quietly to the empty room. "I wish you could have seen what happened today." The photograph didn't answer. It never did. But sometimes, talking to it made the silence a little less heavy. Elias unpacked the bags. Canned soup, chicken noodle, tomato, vegetable, a loaf of bread, peanut butter, coffee, crackers, apples. He lined them up on the counter, and the sight of so much food at once made his throat tight. When was the last time his cupboard had looked like this? Months, maybe longer. He made himself a sandwich, peanut butter on bread, simple and filling, and ate it standing at the counter. Each bite tasted better than anything he'd had in weeks. Not because the food was special, but because he wasn't eating it with the knowledge that this was the last of what he had. There was more now. There would be more tomorrow. After he ate, he sat on the couch and pulled out the stack of business cards and papers. Patricia Ruiz, RN, VA Healthcare. Tommy Delgado, VFW Post 447. Sarah Chen, County Social Services. Michael Brennan, Veterans Legal Clinic. Each card represented a person who'd looked at him today and seen someone worth helping. He set them carefully on the table, arranging them in a neat row. Then he pulled the Purple Heart from his pocket and placed it in the center. The medal caught the dim light from the overhead bulb. Elias stared at it, remembering. Khe-Sanh, February 1968. He'd been in country for 7 months, and every day felt like a year. The combat base was surrounded, under constant artillery fire from North Vietnamese forces in the hills. You learned to sleep through the explosions, or you didn't sleep at all. You learned to move fast when the shells started falling, or you didn't move again. That day, the day that earned him the medal, had started like any other. Gray sky, red mud, the smell of diesel fuel and unwashed bodies. Elias had been in the communications bunker with his radio man, a kid from Ohio named Danny Kowalski, 20 years old, same as Elias. Danny talked constantly about his girlfriend back home, about the car he was going to buy when he got back, about the life he was going to live. Then, the shelling started. Not the usual harassment fire, but a full barrage. The ground shook, the air filled with the scream of incoming rounds. Elias and Danny hit the dirt, covering their heads. The bunker took a direct hit, not a penetrating hit, but close enough that the roof collapsed. Sandbags and timber came down in an avalanche of weight and dust. When the dust cleared, Elias was pinned from the waist down but conscious. Danny was completely buried. Elias could hear him screaming. He didn't remember making the decision to move. He just remembered digging, throwing sandbags aside with his bare hands, ignoring the pain in his leg where something had torn through his calf. The shelling was still coming. Every few seconds, another impact shook the ground. Any one of them could have been the one that killed them both. But Danny was screaming, and Elias couldn't leave him. He dug until his hands bled, until he found Danny's arm, then his shoulder, then his face. He pulled him out just as another shell hit 20 yards away, and the concussion threw them both against the bunker wall. Elias felt something punch into his back, hot and sharp, like being stabbed with a burning knife. Shrapnel. He got Danny out, dragged him to the aid station, collapsed. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Da Nang. They told him Danny had made it. They told him he'd saved a life. They told him he was a hero. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a kid who'd gotten lucky. 3 weeks later, some colonel he'd never met pinned the Purple Heart on his hospital gown and shook his hand. There was a photographer. They took a picture for the base newsletter. The colonel said something about bravery and sacrifice. Elias nodded and said thank you because that's what you were supposed to do. Then the colonel left, and Elias was alone with a medal and a back full of scars. He'd kept the medal all these years, through the rest of his tour, through coming home to a country that didn't want to hear about the war, through finding work as a mechanic, meeting Sarah, building a quiet life, through Sarah's illness, her death, the slow erosion of everything he'd built. He'd kept it because it was proof that once, a long time ago, he'd done something that mattered, and today, he'd almost sold it for $20. Elias picked up the medal and turned it over in his hands. The engraving on the back was worn but still legible. PFC Elias J. Thorne, Private First Class. The lowest rank that wasn't a trainee. He'd never made it higher, never wanted to. He just wanted to do his job and come home. He had done his job. He had come home. And for 50 years he'd carried the weight of that medal and everything it represented. But today, someone had helped him carry it. He thought about Marcus Henderson locking the door of his shop, refusing to let Elias walk away with $20 and no dignity, making phone calls, bringing people together, treating Elias not like a charity case, but like a brother. He thought about Tommy Delgado, paying his gas bill without hesitation, about Patricia Ruiz, promising to push his paperwork through the VA system, about all the others who'd shown up one after another, each bringing a piece of the help he needed. They'd seen him, really seen him. Not as a burden or a problem, but as someone who'd served, who'd sacrificed, who deserved better than freezing alone in a falling-down apartment. For the first time in years, maybe decades, Elias didn't feel invisible. He set the medal back on the table and looked at the business cards again. Tomorrow he'd start making calls. He'd follow up with Patricia about the VA registration. He'd go to the VFW post and thank Tommy in person. He'd take the steps he needed to take. But tonight, He just sat on his couch in his cold apartment and felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. 3 days later, on a Thursday morning, Elias stood outside the VFW Post 447. The building was a squat brick structure with a faded American flag flying out front and a sign that read, "All Veterans Welcome." He'd walked past it 100 times over the years, but never gone inside. He'd told himself he didn't need it, that he wasn't the joining type, that he was fine on his own. He'd been lying. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was dim and smelled like coffee and old wood. There was a small bar along one wall, a pool table in the corner, and several round tables scattered around the room. A dozen men and 2 women, all of them older, sat in clusters talking. They looked up when Elias entered. "Help you," one of them called out. "I'm looking for Tommy Delgado." "That's me." Tommy stood up from one of the tables and walked over. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, his VFW cap pushed back on his head. "Elias Thorne, right?" "Yes, sir." "No, sir, necessary. I worked for a living." Tommy grinned and extended his hand. Elias shook it. "Good to see you. How's the heat situation?" "Paid up. Gas company called me yesterday to confirm. I wanted to come by and say thank you. In person. You're welcome. But like I said, it's not charity, it's what we do." Tommy gestured to the room. "You meet the rest of the post yet?" "No." "Well, come on. Let me introduce you." Tommy led Elias around the room, making introductions. Frank Moretti, Navy, served on a destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin. Linda Washington, Army nurse, 2 tours in Vietnam. Ray Chen, Air Force, flew supply missions into Khe Sanh. Elias stopped. "You flew into Khe Sanh?" Ray nodded. "C-130s, scariest damn landings of my life. That runway was under constant fire. We'd come in fast, drop the supplies and get out before the mortars found us." He looked at Elias. "You were on the ground there?" "February 68. Ray's expression changed. "The siege. Jesus, you boys had it worse than we did. At least we could leave." He stood up and shook Elias's hand. "It's an honor to meet you. I didn't do anything special. You survived, Khe Sanh. That's special enough." They talked for an hour. Elias found himself telling stories he hadn't told in years. Not the big dramatic ones, but the small ones. The way the red mud got into everything. The taste of sea rations heated over burning C4. The sound of helicopters coming in at dawn. The little rituals that kept you sane. The others told their stories too. Linda talked about the field hospital where she'd worked. The endless stream of wounded. The boys who called for their mothers. Frank talked about watching the coastline get shelled from his ship, feeling helpless because they couldn't do more. Ray talked about the pilots who didn't make it back, the empty seats at dinner. They'd all carried pieces of the war home with them. They'd all spent decades trying to figure out how to live with those pieces. "You should come to the meetings," Tommy said as the conversation wound down. "We meet every Thursday night. Nothing formal, just coffee and conversation. Sometimes we do service projects. Clean up the veterans cemetery, visit guys in the hospital, that kind of thing. You'd be welcome." Elias hesitated. "I'm not much of a joiner." "Neither was I," Frank said. "Took me 20 years after I got out to walk through that door. Wish I'd done it sooner." "Think about it," Tommy said. "No pressure. But the offer stands." Elias nodded. He stayed for another half hour, then said his goodbyes and left. As he walked home, he thought about what Frank had said. 20 years, 2 decades of carrying it alone before he'd asked for help. Elias had carried it for 50. Maybe it was time to stop. If this story touched your heart, click like and subscribe to honor those who served. The following Tuesday, Elias had an appointment at the VA clinic. Patricia Ruiz met him in the waiting room smiling. "Right on time," she said. "Come on back." She led him through a maze of hallways to a small office where a doctor was waiting. Dr. Patel, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He spent an hour going over Elias's medical history, or lack thereof. "You haven't seen a doctor in 4 years?" Dr. Patel asked, looking at the forms. "Couldn't afford it. You're a veteran. You're entitled to VA healthcare." I didn't know where to start." Dr. Patel exchanged a glance with Patricia. "Well, you're starting now. Let's do a full workup. I want blood tests, x-rays of that leg and back where you took shrapnel, a cardiac screening. When's the last time you had your eyes checked?" "I don't remember." "We'll add that to the list." The examination took 2 hours. They drew blood, took x-rays, checked his blood pressure and heart rate. Dr. Patel examined the scars on Elias's back and leg, faded now but still visible, puckered circles where the shrapnel had entered and been removed. "These ever give you pain?" Dr. Patel asked. Sometimes when it's cold or when I've been on my feet too long. That's nerve damage. We can treat that. Physical therapy, possibly medication. He made notes on his tablet. I'm also concerned about your weight. You're significantly underweight for your height and frame. Food's been tight, Patricia told me. That's going to change. We're getting you set up with regular meals, and I want to see you back here in a month. We'll monitor your weight and adjust as needed. By the time Elias left the clinic, he had a folder full of paperwork, 3 prescriptions, and appointments scheduled for the next 2 months. Patricia walked him out. This is a lot, Elias said, looking at the folder. It is, but you don't have to do it alone. You've got my number. You get confused, you call me. You miss an appointment, you call me. You need help with anything, you call me. She smiled. We're going to get you healthy, Elias. That's a promise. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. I know you're a Marine. I know you served at Khe-Sanh. I know you've been struggling and no one helped you until now. She put a hand on his arm. That's enough. That's more than enough. Elias felt his eyes sting. He blinked hard. Thank you. You're welcome. Now go home, rest, and take those medications. I'll see you next week. He took the bus home, the folder clutched in his lap. When he got to his apartment, he opened the first prescription bottle, something for pain, and took one with a glass of water. Then he sat on his couch and looked at the Purple Heart, still sitting on the table where he'd left it. Things were changing, slowly, but they were changing. He wasn't alone anymore. Thursday night came, and Elias stood outside the VFW post again. Through the window, he could see people gathering inside. Tommy was there, laughing at something Frank said. Linda was pouring coffee. Ray was setting up chairs. Elias's hand was on the door handle, but he couldn't quite make himself push it open. Old habits died hard. He'd spent so long keeping people at a distance, convincing himself he didn't need anyone, that the idea of walking into a room full of people and admitting he needed help felt like stepping off a cliff. The door opened from the inside. Tommy stood there, grinning. You coming in, or are you going to stand out there all night? Come on. Tommy held the door open. We saved you a seat. Elias stepped inside. The warmth hit him first. Not just the physical warmth of the heated room, but something else. The warmth of belonging, of being expected, of mattering. Everyone, this is Elias Thorne, Tommy announced. Marine Corps, Khe-Sanh, Purple Heart, he's joining us tonight. There was a round of applause. Elias felt his face flush, but he nodded his thanks. Someone handed him a cup of coffee. Someone else pointed him to a chair. He sat down, and the meeting began. It wasn't formal. There was no agenda, no speeches, just people talking. They discussed the upcoming Veterans Day ceremony at the high school. They talked about a member who was in the hospital and needed visitors. They shared updates on their lives, grandkids, health issues, small victories and frustrations. And then Tommy said, Elias, you want to share anything? Elias hesitated. Then he thought about Marcus Henderson locking that door, about all the people who'd shown up, about Patricia and Dr. Patel and everyone who'd helped him in the past week. I almost sold my Purple Heart, he said quietly. Last week, I was going to pawn it for $20 to pay my gas bill. The room went silent. But the shop owner, Marcus Henderson, he wouldn't let me. He locked the door and started making phone calls, and within an hour there were a dozen people in that shop, all of them helping me. They paid my bills. They got me registered with the VA. They gave me food. They gave me hope. His voice cracked on the last word. He cleared his throat. I spent 50 years thinking I had to do everything alone, that asking for help was weakness, that I didn't deserve help, and I was wrong. I was so wrong. He looked around the room. I don't know how to repay what was done for me. I don't know how to thank everyone who helped, but I'm here, I'm showing up, and I'm not going to disappear again. Tommy nodded slowly. That's all we ask. Show up, be part of the community, and when you're able, help the next guy who needs it. I will, Elias said, I promise. The meeting continued. When it ended, people came up to Elias one by one. They shook his hand. They gave him their phone numbers. They invited him to coffee, to lunch, to the next service project. By the time he left, his pockets were full of scraps of paper with names and numbers, and his heart was fuller than it had been in years. He walked home through the cold night, but he didn't feel cold. He felt alive. 2 months passed. Winter gave way to early spring. The snow melted, revealing the brown grass and crocus shoots underneath. Elias's life changed in small, steady increments. His weight came back. Dr. Patel's treatments worked. The pain in his back and leg decreased. The VA approved his disability claim and he started receiving a monthly check that covered his rent and bills, with enough left over for groceries. Meals on Wheels delivered lunch every day. He attended the VFW meetings every Thursday without fail. He wasn't rich. He wasn't living in luxury, but he wasn't cold, and he wasn't hungry, and he wasn't alone. One afternoon in March, Tommy called him. "Elias, I need a favor." "Name it." "We've got a situation. Guy named Robert Vasquez, Army veteran, Vietnam. He's about to be evicted from his apartment. Behind on rent, no family, no support system. Sound familiar?" Elias's chest tightened. "Yeah, it sounds familiar. Marcus Henderson called me. Vasquez came into his shop trying to pawn his bronze star. Marcus did the same thing he did with you. Locked the door, made calls. We're putting together a support package. I thought maybe you'd want to come along. Talk to him. Let him know he's not alone." Elias didn't hesitate. "When?" "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Meet me at the post. I'll be there." The next morning, Elias met Tommy and 3 other VFW members outside Henderson's pawn and loan. Marcus was waiting for them, and inside, sitting on that same wooden stool where Elias had sat 2 months ago, was a man in his 60s, thin, hollow-eyed, holding a bronze star in his shaking hands. Elias walked up to him. "Robert Vasquez." The man looked up. "Yeah, I'm Elias Thorne, Marine Corps, Vietnam. 2 months ago, I was sitting right where you are. I was trying to pawn my Purple Heart for $20. Robert's eyes widened. "What happened?" "These people happened." Elias gestured to Tommy, to Marcus, to the others. "They helped me. They're going to help you, and when you're back on your feet, you're going to help the next guy. That's how this works." Robert stared at him. "I don't understand." "You will," Elias said, echoing the words Marcus had said to him. "Just wait." And then it began again. The phone calls, the people arriving, the resources, the support, the community rising up to catch someone who was falling. Elias stayed the whole time. He talked to Robert, shared his story, gave him his phone number. He helped carry bags of groceries to Robert's car. He promised to take him to the next VFW meeting. When it was over and Robert had left, dazed but no longer alone, Elias stood with Marcus and Tommy outside the shop. "You did good today," Marcus said. "I just told him my story. That's all it takes sometimes. Letting someone know they're not the only one, that there's a way through." Marcus smiled. "You're paying it forward, Elias. That's exactly what we need." Tommy clapped Elias on the shoulder. "We're starting that outreach program, the one I mentioned. We're calling it the Last Watch Project. The idea is to identify veterans who are falling through the cracks and get them help before they hit bottom. We need volunteers, people who've been there, who can talk to these guys and connect with them. You interested?" Elias thought about the day he'd walked into this shop, ready to sell the proof of his service for $20. He thought about how close he'd come to giving up entirely. And he thought about Marcus locking that door, refusing to let him walk away with nothing but cash and shame. "Yeah," Elias said. "I'm interested." "Good. First meeting is next Tuesday, 7 p.m. at the post. We'll figure out the details." Tommy grinned. "Welcome to the team." 6 months later, on a warm September evening, the VFW Post 447 held a special ceremony. The room was packed. Veterans, family members, community leaders, local press. At the front of the room, a banner read, "The Last Watch Project, No Veteran Left Behind." Tommy stood at a podium speaking into a microphone. 6 months ago, we started this program with a simple goal: find veterans who are struggling and help them before it's too late. Since then, we've assisted 43 veterans. We've prevented evictions, paid utility bills, connected people with healthcare, and most importantly, we've built a community where no one has to face their battles alone. He paused, looking out at the crowd. "This program exists because of one man's refusal to accept that a veteran's service could be reduced to a pawn shop transaction. Marcus Henderson, would you stand up?" Marcus, sitting in the front row, stood. The room erupted in applause. He nodded, embarrassed, and sat back down. "And it exists," Tommy continued, "because of the veterans who've been through the struggle and came back to help others. One of those veterans is Elias Thorne." "Elias, come on up here." Elias, sitting near the back, felt his heart pound. He hadn't expected this. He stood slowly and made his way to the front. Tommy handed him the microphone. Elias looked out at the crowd. He saw Marcus, smiling. He saw Patricia, the nurse who'd helped him navigate the VA system. He saw Dr. Patel. He saw Frank and Linda and Ray and a dozen other faces he'd come to know over the past months. And in the back, he saw Robert Vasquez, the man he'd helped 2 months ago, now healthy and attending meetings regularly. "I don't really know what to say," Elias began. His voice was shaky. 6 months ago, I walked into Marcus Henderson's shop ready to sell my Purple Heart for $20. I was cold, hungry, and I'd convinced myself that I didn't matter anymore, that my service didn't matter, that I was just taking up space. He paused, gathering himself. Marcus didn't let me sell that medal. He locked the door and made phone calls, and within an hour my life changed. Not because someone gave me money, but because someone saw me, really saw me. And then a whole community showed up to say, "You're not alone. You're not forgotten. You matter." His voice grew stronger. I spent 50 years carrying the weight of my service by myself. I thought that's what strength was, never asking for help, never admitting you're struggling. But I was wrong. Real strength is showing up. It's asking for help when you need it. It's accepting that help when it's offered. And then it's turning around and helping the next person. He held up the Purple Heart, which he now wore on a chain around his neck, under his shirt. He pulled it out so everyone could see it. This medal represents one day in 1968 when I did my job and pulled my radio man out of a collapsed bunker. But it also represents every day since then, every day I survived. Every day I kept going even when it was hard. Every day I chose to live. He looked at Marcus. "You gave me back more than this medal. You gave me back my life. You gave me back my dignity. And you showed me that the battle doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight at home, in silence, alone." He turned back to the crowd. "But we don't have to fight them alone. Not anymore. The Last Watch project is proof of that. We're watching out for each other. We're making sure no one falls through the cracks. We're honoring the service and sacrifice of every veteran, not just with words, but with action." His voice broke. "I'm alive today because someone cared enough to lock a door and make some phone calls. I'm here today because a community decided I was worth saving. And I'm standing here now to tell every veteran in this room and every veteran out there who's struggling, you are worth saving. Your service matters. Your life matters. And you are not alone." The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the whole room was on its feet. Applause thundering through the small space. Elias stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed. Tommy pulled him into a hug, pounding him on the back. Marcus came up and shook his hand. Patricia wiped tears from her eyes. When the ceremony ended and people began to leave, Elias stood outside in the parking lot looking up at the stars. The night was clear and cool, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt at peace. "Elias?" He turned. A young woman stood there, maybe 30, with dark hair and nervous eyes. "Yes? My name is Jennifer Kowalski. My grandfather was Danny Kowalski. He served in Vietnam." Elias went very still. "Danny Kowalski, from Ohio." "Yes," she smiled. "He died 3 years ago, but before he did, he told me about Kay's son, about the bunker collapse, about the Marine who pulled him out and saved his life." Her eyes filled with tears. "He told me your name, Elias Thorne. I've been looking for you for 2 years. Why? Because I wanted to thank you. My grandfather lived 50 more years because of what you did. He got married. He had 3 kids. He had 7 grandchildren. He had a whole life, a beautiful full life, because you didn't leave him in that bunker." She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It showed an older man surrounded by family, children and grandchildren, all smiling. Danny Kowalski, 70 years old, gray-haired and happy. "That's him," she said. 2 months before he died. He talked about you until the very end. He said you were the bravest man he ever knew." Elias took the photograph with shaking hands. He stared at Danny's face, older, weathered, but alive, so gloriously alive. "He made it," Elias whispered. "He really made it. Because of you." Elias couldn't speak. He just stood there, holding the photograph, tears streaming down his face. All these years, he'd wondered. He'd known Danny survived the initial injury, but after that he'd lost track. He'd never known if Danny made it home, if he'd lived a good life, if saving him had mattered in the long run. Now he knew. It had mattered. It had mattered more than he could possibly have imagined. Jennifer hugged him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving us our grandfather." When she pulled away, she pressed the photograph into his hands. "Keep it. He would have wanted you to have it." She left, and Elias stood alone in the parking lot holding the photograph. He looked at Danny's face, at the family surrounding him, at the evidence of a life well lived. 50 years. A wife, children, grandchildren. All of it possible because one 20-year-old Marine had refused to leave his radio man behind. Marcus came out of the building and found Elias standing there. "You okay?" Elias looked at him. Danny made it. My radio man. The one I pulled out at Khe-Sanh. He lived, he had a family, he had a whole life. Marcus smiled. Of course he did. Because of you. I didn't know. All these years I didn't know if it mattered. It always mattered, Elias. Every life you touch matters. Every person you help, every hand you extend, every door you refuse to let someone walk through with their dignity in their pocket, it all matters. Elias nodded slowly. He looked down at the photograph again, then at the purple heart hanging around his neck. 2 pieces of proof, one that he'd bled, one that his bleeding had meant something. Thank you, Elias said quietly, for everything, for locking that door, for making those calls, for not letting me sell this medal, for giving me my life back. You're welcome, but Elias, yeah, you gave yourself your life back. I just opened the door. You're the one who walked through it. If you believe every life holds a story worth remembering, subscribe to this channel and join our community. 1 year after walking into Henderson's Pawn and Loan, Elias Thorne stood in front of a high school auditorium full of students. Veterans Day assembly. Tommy had asked him to speak, and after some hesitation, he'd agreed. He wore his purple heart on his chest, pinned to a jacket that actually fit, purchased with money from his disability check. He looked out at the sea of young faces, teenagers who'd never known war, who'd never known what it meant to serve. My name is Elias Thorne, he began. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served in Vietnam from 1967 to 1968. I was wounded at Khe-Sanh and received the Purple Heart. He paused, gathering his thoughts. For most of my life, I thought that medal was the most important thing about me. It was proof that I'd served, that I'd sacrificed, that I'd done something that mattered. And when I got older, when life got hard, I held onto that medal like it was the only thing keeping me afloat. He touched the medal on his chest. A year ago, I tried to pawn this. I was broke, cold, and hungry. I walked into a pawn shop and put this medal on the counter and asked for $20. I was ready to sell the proof of my service because I didn't think I had any other choice. The auditorium was silent, but the shop owner, a veteran himself, refused to buy it. Instead, he locked the door and made phone calls. Within an hour, a dozen people showed up to help me. They paid my bills, they got me healthcare, they gave me food, they gave me a community, they gave me back my life. He looked out at the students. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. The battles don't stop when you come home. Sometimes the hardest fights are the ones no one sees. The fight against poverty, against loneliness, against the feeling that you don't matter anymore. His voice grew stronger. But here's what I learned. You don't have to fight those battles alone. There are people who care. There are communities that will catch you when you fall. And there is always, always hope, even when you can't see it. Even when you're standing in a pawn shop with your medal in your hand, ready to give up, there is hope. He held up the photograph of Danny Kowalski and his family. This is my radio man, the man I pulled out of a collapsed bunker in 1968. I didn't know if saving him mattered. I didn't know if anything I did mattered. But he lived. He had a family. He had a beautiful life. And that life existed because I didn't give up, because I did my job, because I refused to leave him behind. He looked directly at the students. Every one of you has the power to change someone's life. Every one of you can be the person who locks the door and makes the phone calls, who sees someone struggling and says, "Not on my watch," who refuses to let another human being fall through the cracks. He touched the Purple Heart again. This medal doesn't just represent one day in 1968. It represents every day since then. Every day I survived. Every day I kept going. Every day I chose to live. And now every day I choose to help someone else keep going. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, but in the silent auditorium, everyone heard. Your service, whatever form it takes, matters. Your life matters. And you are never, ever alone. Remember that. Hold on to that. And when you see someone who's forgotten it, remind them. He stepped back from the podium. The auditorium erupted in applause. Students stood. Teachers wiped their eyes. And in the front row, Marcus Henderson and Tommy Delgado and the rest of the Last Watch Project team stood and saluted. Elias saluted back. After the assembly, students lined up to shake his hand, to thank him, to take pictures with him. One young man, maybe 17, hung back until the others had left. "Mr. Thorne?" "Yes?" "My dad's a veteran. Iraq War. He's been struggling. He won't talk about it, but I know he's not okay. I don't know how to help him." Elias pulled out a business card. His own card now with his name and the Last Watch Project logo. Give this to him. Tell him to call me. Tell him there are people who understand. Tell him he doesn't have to do it alone. The young man took the card, his hand shaking slightly. Thank you. Thank you for caring enough to ask. That night, Elias sat in his apartment. The same apartment, but different now. The heat worked. The cupboards were full. The walls had new photographs. Danny Kowalski and his family. The Last Watch Project team. Elias with Robert Vasquez and the other veterans he'd helped over the past year. And in the center of the table, in a small frame, the Purple Heart. He looked at it for a long time, thinking about the journey that medal had taken. From a field hospital in Da Nang to a pawn shop in Pennsylvania. From a symbol of sacrifice to a symbol of survival. From proof of service to proof of community. He thought about Marcus Henderson, who'd seen a desperate old man and refused to let him walk away with nothing but $20 and shame. He thought about Tommy and Patricia and Dr. Patel and all the others who'd shown up, who'd helped, who'd cared. He thought about Danny Kowalski alive because Elias hadn't given up, about Robert Vasquez and the 42 other veterans the Last Watch Project had helped, about the ripples spreading outward from one locked door and one series of phone calls. He thought about the young man at the assembly, holding the business card, ready to help his father. The work continued, the watch continued, and Elias Thorne, Marine, veteran, survivor, was part of it. He picked up the photograph of Sarah, his wife, and spoke to it like he did every night. I made it, Sarah. I almost didn't, but I did. And now I'm helping others make it too. I think you'd be proud of that. The photograph smiled back at him, frozen in time, forever young. But Elias was old now, gray and weathered and scarred, and he was alive. Gloriously, purposefully alive. He set the photograph down and looked at the Purple Heart one more time. It had never been about the medal. It had always been about what the medal represented: service, sacrifice, courage, survival, and community. Always community. No one fights alone. No one falls alone. No one is forgotten. That was the promise. That was the mission. That was the last watch. And Elias Thorne, who'd once been ready to pawn his Purple Heart for $20, now wore it every day as a reminder, not of what he'd lost, but of what he'd found: dignity, purpose, brotherhood, hope, and a life worth living, worth fighting for, worth sharing with others who needed to know they weren't alone. The medal hung around his neck, warm against his chest, and for the first time in 50 years, Elias Thorne was home. End.